Hello, good evening, and it's with pleasure that I introduce you to episode 5 in this series of 8 programs that I produced for Channel 4 in the United Kingdom in 1986. This is the last of the ones that was filmed in London in the summer of 1986. And in a way, it's one of the toughest for me to comment upon this evening. I'm speaking to you from Dublin in May 2021, and Detta O'Cathain, Baroness O'Cathain, Detta O'Cathain OBE, Order of the British Empire, awarded for her contribution to agriculture and business in the UK, passed away on the 23rd of April last. Her funeral just took place recently on the 17th of May in Arundel, where she lived and where she passed away, in West Sussex in England. So Detta was one of the people for whom I had a particular interest. She used to appear on a lot of television at the time in the 1980s. She was at that stage the managing director of the Milk Marketing Board in the UK and was on so many top boards in the United Kingdom. I can't tell you now, when women still feel that there isn't proper representation either on public or private boards or in other areas where power is, and women have to be where power is, to have an equal say and to make representation for the balance in society. But it was still very, very difficult for people in the 1980s. And there she was. So taking so much of it in her stride and very highly respected for her business acumen, her management skills, and for her integrity. She was a black and white person, as she says in this interview, and what you see is what you get, and that was her. She had very right-wing views, which wouldn't necessarily have complied with most people's, but you see beyond that, and you see the person doing the job that they do in different industries and businesses, and giving 150%, which she did all the time. I had written to her to ask her to become involved, and I got she had a beautiful handwriting style, almost like professional calligraphy. It was sort of printed, and she wrote back a very lengthy letter on the Milk Marketing Board notepaper to say why she would decline. And then months passed, and by chance I was going with members of the Irish Bar who were also members of the English Bar of the Middle Temple. And we had this reciprocal arrangement that every second year a group would go to one or the other. And Ireland was playing England at Twickenham in rugby in the January of that year, and it coincided with the Irish Bar's trip over to the Middle Temple. We were being brought around on a tour on the Friday evening of some new bedchamber, I think, that had been renovated in the House of Commons. Then there was a dinner on the Saturday night in Middle Temple after the rugby match. And then there was home hospitality on the Sunday in somebody's house for lunch and home. So just before I left, I decided to lift the phone. It just came to me, as these things do. I'd never let it go out of my mind, and I rang her office. Her lovely secretary, Pam, just said, "I'll see," and she went away. And the next voice was Detta's. "Hello, and you're probably coming over for this weekend," because she knew about the rugby. So then I explained the context of the barristers' reciprocal event with the Middle Temple members and what I was doing and where I was staying. And I said, "I'd love to see you for a drink on the Friday evening." And she said, "I can actually do that." And not only did she know where the hotel was, of course, just off Jermyn Street in London near Piccadilly, she knew the owner, Lord Forte, I think, owned the hotel, as she would. And she said, "I'll meet you there in the foyer for a drink." And she said, "Actually, I'll be passing Westminster, so I can take you in my car and drop you off at the House of Commons," which she did, which gave us a bit longer to chat. And she said, "Oh, how will I know you?" I said, "Well, don't worry, I'll know you." And I said, "I've got shoulder-length brown hair and I need to lose weight." And so I perched myself fine and early in the foyer of the hotel. All my other colleagues were all around waiting to have a drink before they were heading off in taxis to the guide we were getting around the House of Commons. And the next minute, I was facing the door. So she came by car, knowing the building. She'd come into the garage and she made her entrance through the side. So she came up behind me and she leaned round the chair and she said, "You don't need to lose weight." And that was our beginning of what was to be a very long and lasting friendship. She was a woman for whom I had huge respect. But I will leave it for you now to determine the recollections that she gives about her early life, she and her childhood, and her memories of growing up. And again, talked for half an hour, and there was no reference to all her achievements. That was consistent with all of the women, and I have great regard for them for this, because it was so different, I think, to how things are now, where things are very showy and people, maybe this sounds critical, but people are really doing an advertisement for themselves all the time. It's all with an eye to social media and spreading the message, but just very quietly, very humbly coming along and in very good humour, participating in this programme series. And I'm forever grateful to them all for it and for the amount of enthusiasm which they showed. So Detta talks about her childhood and about her recollections of her time in Ireland and going for a drive on Sundays. As she said, do you remember them? Well, not a lot of people remember Sunday drives, but it's what people did in that time, not just in Ireland, I think in other countries as well. Particularly if you weren't anywhere near the sea, so you drove to the sea on a Sunday. That's my recollection of it, is for the time that I lived in London, we actually drove to Brighton on a Sunday. You were barely there, got an ice cream, and it was time to turn back. So similar memories for Detta of her childhood spent in Ireland, and then she went to England. And again, I have given you all the details in her biography, which is enormous in the detail section, but I'm sure you're aware of it anyway. So with great respect and with great sadness, and in memory of a life well lived, a great business acumen, success and service, and a great track record of public service as well while she was in the House of Lords. I hope you enjoy it.
Detta O'Cathain is a beautiful Irish name. Why did you keep your Irish name?
Because I felt fairly strongly that I wanted to be associated with my roots. And although I'm here and likely to remain here in London for the rest of my life, it's a very significant part of me. And my Irish roots are very much part of my being and my personality. And I thought there wasn't any point in sort of saying, no, I'm not going to call myself O'Cathain. And I like it.
Was there a tradition of speaking Irish in the family?
Yes, there was. Not particularly in my family, because my mother was English, but I did go to an Irish school for 12 months, the A school down in Killarney. So I learnt everything through Irish, maths and Latin, everything like that. And my father and I still speak Irish. It's quite extraordinary. He lives now very close to us down in Sussex. He came over from Ireland a few years ago after my mother died. He was very lonely. And I pop in and see him, and we very often, my Irish is pretty rusty, but I enjoy it. It's just part of my makeup, if you like.
Did you speak Irish at home when you were a child?
No, very little, except with my grandmother I did, because my grandfather was one of the founders of the Gaelic League way back at the turn of the century, and in fact he wrote the definitive Irish grammar at the time, Ceacht Caint Granny, and my uncle translated some other works into Irish. So there's a great history of the Irish language within my father's family. So when I was a very small child, I remember going over to my grandmother's house in Dublin, and she used to talk to me in Irish, and I always enjoyed it. Again, it was a thing that I always had to try and prove that I was capable of doing it, I suppose, always straining to get yet another achievement, if you like.
Did you learn a lot about Irish history from that grandfather?
No, not my grandfather. My grandfather unfortunately died before I was born, just before I was born. But from my grandmother, yes. And yes, I think now at this stage it's all beginning to fall into place. When I was a very small child, I remember her telling me about Parnell. And Parnell never really meant very much to me, but she was very much a Parnell supporter. And now I find it quite ironic that where I live down in Sussex, only 4 miles from where I live, there's a graveyard, and Kitty O'Shea is buried there. Yes, it's quite extraordinary. So sometimes, you suddenly something that you've had all in your past then suddenly rears its head, and actually I've been there, and it's rather sad, really, because the grave is in pretty tatty condition and the stone is very lopsided, and I feel there's such a link between that tatty little grave in Littlehampton, Sussex, and the future of Ireland, and indeed how Ireland is now. Because if it weren't for Kitty O'Shea, one wonders what might have happened. And I think that's how I find the Irish interest still coming into my life all the time. There's hardly a day that something about Ireland and the Irish doesn't impinge on my life, although I'm very much involved in the British scene.
Were you heavily influenced by that grandmother?
I think so, yes. Yes,
In what
yes.
way?
Well, she was a very strong character, very much an achiever. My grandfather apparently was very much an idealist, and he was in the civil service, but spent a lot of his time working on, well, the Irish books and things like that. And my grandmother had 7 children, and I think she more or less had to bring them up fairly single-handed. And they all turned out exceptionally fine people. And I think, particularly now, I admire her an awful lot more than I did then. I was pretty terrified of her. She was very ferocious in a lot of ways, and not dogmatic, but a disciplinarian. And I had an English grandmother who was precisely the same. So as a child, there were these 2 women, very, very strong in my background. And my English grandfather also had died before I was born. So it was, I suppose, a bit of like a matriarchal society. But there was a very strong feminine influence, but not feminist, I suppose.
Were you afraid of them in any way?
Oh, I think I was. I always wanted to be on my best behaviour. I didn't want to do anything to upset them. I didn't want to lose their respect and their affection, I suppose. That's probably it. So I tried to toe the line.
Did you ever feel that you had lost that?
I think perhaps, yes, occasionally when I was over boisterous, and I think probably yes. But generally speaking, I think right to the time both of them died. They both died actually within months of each other, strangely enough, one in Dublin and one in Birmingham. I think right up to the time they died, I think they had a healthy sort of respect for me. I think also I was the eldest grandchild, and so there was a lot of attention paid to me. There was a spotlight factor, really. And I felt that the responsibility was on me to perform, which responsibility I still feel, that I can't let the family down, I can't let my relations down, whenever I do anything, I put myself way down the pecking order as to who I let down. It's my family, it's my country, it's my company, it's my friends. And then suddenly I sort of say, oh, well, it's me too. But that's really, I have this hierarchy of people that I feel I'm carrying on my back. Strange, but anyway.
And did you always feel like that?
I think probably yes. At school I felt that way as well. I felt about my classmates, and if I did something outrageous outside school, lots of things that I would do, sort of whistle or something like that was not done. When I think of outrageous things in the 1950s were whistling. I would always feel that I let the nuns down or something like that, yes. You always feel that whatever you do, that a whole lot of other people, that you just can't sort of ditch, if you like.
What was the nuns' attitude to whistling?
They weren't very happy about it.
Was there something about the story that Mary cried when a girl whistled? Was that?
Oh, I didn't hear about that. No, I didn't know that. I didn't hear. No, they just didn't think it was very ladylike. And we were brought up to be ladylike. And I was rather tomboy and fairly boisterous. And I guess, I didn't fit in with the convention. I was never very neat and tidy. And in fact, I was very untidy when I think about it. Now I'm really extravagantly neat, I think. I think that those influences, stick with you throughout life. But I've nothing but the highest regard for the nuns who taught me.
Really?
Yes. Oh, yes. And then again, that was a very strong female influence in my life. They were women I totally respected. I thought they were amazing. And even when I went back to school 25 years after, I still rather quaked going in those doors. And only last year, in October, I popped into Laurel Hill just to see them. And there was a nun who taught me there, and she would scare the living daylights out of me. And for once, I felt reasonably confident, because she was saying how proud they were of seeing my photograph in the paper and realising that I had actually achieved quite a lot. And I suddenly said to Mother Gonzaga she was at that stage, at least as she was when I knew her. She's now sister, something or other, I can't remember. They've all changed their names as well as changing their habits. I don't mean their habits, but their clothes. And she said, I said, you know, are you still teaching? She said, oh, for goodness sake, no, Detta, I'm 73. And I looked at her and I said, look, you were 73 when you taught me. And immediately there was that look in her face and I thought, oh, you've done it again, Detta. But it was really rather nice. And she actually told me that she was quite scared of me. I was a very strong personality.
Really?
And I was amazed, yes, absolutely amazed.
What did she teach you?
She taught me French and Latin. And she really was wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Did you work hard to please her?
Oh, yes. And we had a maths teacher, Mother Lawrence, who unfortunately died just before the 25-year reunion that we organised. And I was very sorry that I never saw her after I left school, because she taught me things that I still use every day, shortcuts in getting percentages and things like that.
Really?
And she was such an extraordinary woman. Very strong personality, and she also taught me art, and that was another abiding interest of mine. So it was really quite amazing. They were a marvellous bunch of women. And another woman there who taught me history and made history live. And I think my love of reading biographies now and going to places like Russia and really trying to find out all about Catherine the Great stems directly from the influence of that particular nun. They were quite an extraordinary bunch of women.
Were you a solitary sort of child, or did you have lots of friends?
Oh, I think I had quite a lot of friends.
Did you
Yes,
have one in
quite a-
particular?
Yes, I did, yes. In both schools, both when I was in Dublin, at Loreto in Rathfarnham, and then when I was in Laurel Hill, yes, I did. And in fact, my school friend from Laurel Hill lives only about 40 miles from me now. So we see one another. We don't live in one another's pockets. In fact, we go many months without seeing one another, but there's always a telephone. And we always pick up, and immediately I lost touch with her for years. And then another friend of mine who met me in London said, do you remember Bubbles? And I said, Bubbles? Oh, well, her family called her Bubbles. It was Nuella. And I said, oh, yes, I'd love to meet her again. And we just sort of got together. And it's marvellous because her children are terrific friends of mine, really. She's got 2 grown-up daughters and a grown-up son. And I like meeting that generation. And you know, we get on, and she gets on very well with my husband, and we have a lot of fun together.
Were your parents good friends too?
I don't really think necessarily good friends. Again, I admired them enormously, and I was quite afraid of them because they were disciplinarians too. I didn't see a lot of my parents. I saw a lot of my school chums because, of course, I was away at boarding school, and I've probably seen more of my father now than I saw as a child. He certainly has more. I have a better relationship with him now. It's much more on an equal basis, and we laugh a lot and we pull one another's legs. I mean, I would never have pulled my father's leg when I was a child, but we do. And
Why not?
Because he was very stern, and somehow the parental role at that stage, we're talking about the 40s and 50s, you would never make a joke at your father's expense, did you? Did you?
Yes.
Gosh, I wouldn't have dared. And yet I'm reasonably I'm quite courageous about things, but I wouldn't, no.
In what way was he stern?
He laid down, there were rules, either spoken or unspoken. And if you made too much noise, or if you caused problems, or if you caused your mother, particularly, he was very caring about my mother. And my mother was a very sensitive soul. And if I upset her, which I probably did by being rude on occasions, or not behaving perhaps the way she thought I ought to, and banging doors and things, and being nasty to my brother and sister, that would upset her, and he in turn would get very cross with me for upsetting my mother. I can remember many incidents of that happening.
Such as?
Well, me making some sort of flip statement one day as I flounced out of the house on a Saturday morning. I remember well going off to see some friends, and I came back and my mother was rather red-eyed and my father was standing in the kitchen, and he said, you just better toe the line from now on, because otherwise, you know, you can get out of this house. Oh, he meant it too.
And had you done something outrageous?
No, I'd probably made some comment about, she probably said, well, I don't even remember the incident. I remember it was something probably like, well, I don't think you should wear those sort of coloured dress, and I wear what I like type of thing, you know. And I know what I want to do. And of course, you didn't say things like that. I mean, when I see some of the children of friends of mine, the way they treat their parents now, I think, gosh, I don't think it's any better, life's any better or worse for doing it that way. But
Did you feel repressed by it?
Yes, I felt repressed.
Did that
But
make you
that's not a bad
vengeful in
thing.
any way?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it's a bad thing to feel repressed. I mean, you can't have everything you want in life.
Do you think that brings out the good in you?
I don't know, I've never thought about it. I feel slightly repressed now. I mean, I feel repressed here. Yes, thank goodness. Yes. But I feel repressed in my work. I mean, there are some times I want to tell somebody he's the greatest fool, you know. I think, no, I can't do that. I mean, not only is it not done, but you would probably cause untold damage to the person's self-confidence, and I don't really want to do that. So all the time you are bottling certain things up inside you. And I think it's probably good training when you start off as a child feeling slightly repressed. I mean, there were certain things in my life that I resented that I wasn't able to do. And it's quite extraordinary. And I'm now doing them.
Like
I mean,
what?
things like, well, you always laughed at it. I was never allowed roller skates. And on St. Stephen's Day, every year, I really cried my eyes out because everyone all around Rathgar and Terranure were always on roller skates. And my parents wouldn't allow me to have roller skates. So I happened to mention this to a very good friend of mine about 3 years ago. And for Christmas, guess what they gave me? Roller boots. So my goddaughter, my elder goddaughter, the one who's now 15, said, she saw these roller boots, and of course she's a great roller skater, and she said, well, you're going to have to learn. So she's giving me lessons. I'm getting quite good now. So I rode around the car park on my roller boots.
Why were they against roller skating?
I think they thought it was just, I damaged myself. They never explained it. I think probably if they'd explained it, but even if they'd said, well, you know, you'll break your ankle, I'd say, oh, well, so what, you know, so-and-so didn't break their ankle, probably. I was quite cheeky in a lot of ways, you know, and that's when I used to get into trouble. But there were certain other things. I've never been to a football match, and that was another thing that I was never encouraged to go to mass spectator sports or anything like that. And a couple of times I said, you know, I'd like to go. Oh, you don't want to go with too many people, and it's too rough and things like that. I mean, that's where I felt repressed. But I've been to a couple of football matches since, and I think they were probably right.
What was it like being the eldest of the family?
Difficult.
Why?
Again, you felt the sense of responsibility. You felt that you had to be an example, I guess. It was difficult.
And did you work hard at that?
I don't know. I think on reflection, probably I did, yes.
Did that lead to conflict then with those behind you?
Oh, yes, yes. We're not close at all. And I resented when they seemed to get away with a lot of things that I wouldn't have got away with, or I wouldn't have allowed myself to do because I felt I was being an example.
That's an extraordinary thing in families. Why do you think that happens, that parents let the younger ones away with things that they won't let the older one away with?
Well, I think that when they have children first, the first child is a completely new experience, like the first job you've got. And you're testing your way, and you really don't know what to do, and you want to do your best. So you impose all sorts of limitations, and you try to bring them up in the best possible way, both a religious background and an academic background, etc. And then by the time the second and the third one are, they get more relaxed about it, and they don't get so twitched about it. I'm sure that's the reason. So the eldest one just takes it, you know, and has it. I'm not so sure that that's a generalization, but certainly it's true in my case. And my sister still, she's 7 years younger than I am. I still regard her as totally feckless, which is, no, it's not fair at all. She's very responsible, she's got a very responsible job, but I'm amazed at some of the things she still does and gets away with, you know, and the way she smokes and leaves ashtrays all around the place, and I just think, oh, God, you know, this is awful.
Do you think she went against you, that she became that way deliberately?
Oh, I think probably, yes, there was an element of that, yes.
Were there
I was a strong... Yes, not so much between my sister and myself, really, because there was 7 years difference. And, of course, during her growing up period, I was away. I was away at boarding school. But I remember vividly feeling resentment in about 1947 or thereabouts. She was 2 years of age. And bananas first came back into Ireland after the war. I'd never seen a banana. I'd seen picture books of bananas, you know, in the encyclopedia, and read all about bananas. And I was dying to have a banana. And, of course, they were like gold. And I think they were given 2. And, of course, my sister was rather weakling. She was only 2, and my mother sort of mashed up the banana and cream for my sister. I wasn't allowed to have any, and I thought that was really pretty outrageous. So I think right from then, you know, and sort of Rice Krispies came in. She had the Rice Krispies and we didn't, you know. And I think that was the sort of thing that it was difficult. I think there was also a particular circumstance because she wasn't very well. And when she was very tiny indeed, she had her appendix out. And I remember, you know, the great fuss being made of her. And I thought, I wish I had my appendix out. You know, I was about 10 at the time.
Do you feel jealous of her then?
Probably, yes. I hate to admit it, but probably, yes. I hope I don't feel jealous or envious of anybody now. And that's one of the things that I have certainly battled against, because you always have this sort of slight envy. You sort of think, well, I envy, but I can honestly say with my hand on my heart, I do not envy anybody anything. And I hope that doesn't sound sort of complacent and arrogant or anything, but I just feel I'm so lucky with what I've got and what I've been given. I think that's really very much part of me. But at that stage, yes, I'm sure I did. Certainly the bananas. And I absolutely loathe bananas, by the way. They give me frightful indigestion. So it must be some way sort of playing back at me.
What did you enjoy doing with your mother and father?
I don't know, really. It's a strange question.
Did you have fun together?
No, there wasn't a lot of fun. I enjoyed the conversation.
Where did that take place?
Oh, at meals, always. And I think that really was it. Occasionally we used to go out for drives in the car, you know. People don't seem to go to drives in the car anymore, but I used to enjoy that. And I'd go to the National Gallery and things like that, and a museum, and that sort of thing I used to
Where
like.
would you go for the drives?
Oh, out over the Wicklow Hills down to, we used to go to British in the summer, of course, and the Vale of Avoca was a great favourite of my mother's, and Glendalough, and all those places. Ballysmutton Bridge. Do you know what Ballysmutton Bridge is? Wow. That's in one of these areas over the Sally Gap down there. We used to play around there, and I have a lot of memories of going out on picnics, actually. And
Was there a ritual surrounding those outings?
I think there probably was, yes. There probably was. Particularly yes, there was. I never thought about that. When we went to for instance, when we went to the sea, my father used to always build a sandcastle for us. It was always the same sort of size, and he smokes, and he always took one of his matches and put it at the top, so the flag. And I remember only about 4 weeks ago, I was down in Florida, and I was there for a conference. And on the Sunday afternoon before the conference began, I took a walk along what they call the ocean. We'd call it just the beach, really. And there were hundreds of people there. And I came across these people building a castle, exact same type of castle, and with the same moat where the sea came in. And I just had to stop, and I had to tell them they had to have a match to put there as a flag. I think they must have thought I was quite loopy, but somehow it all comes back. Extraordinary, really. But, yes, I remember things like that. That was the ritual at the sea. And then the ritual playing by this river, which I think was one of the tributaries of the Liffey, Ballysmutton. We used to dam it. You know, we'd put sort of little boulders, you know, ones that we could manage to roll, and we'd sort of put little bits just to try and move it. In other ways, our first lesson in physics, I suppose. But it was really quite, the force of water. We just loved that, and hopping across stones and things. Yes, my brother and I used to do that, and my father always took part. My mother usually sort of sat on the rug and read the papers or something, but it was good. Of course, we always had to watch my sister in case she fell in, did something stupid, you know. That's, it was, they were quite, I look back on them, they're quite good.
Do you look back a lot?
No, not really. Don't have time. I enjoy talking about it now. I mean, this is the first time I've thought about those things for years and years and years, but no, not really. I think the people who live in the past, they lose out on today because they're not taking advantage of the opportunities that are here and now. I don't look forward very much to the future either. I live very much today, and I try to live each day as though it's going to be my last. I'm very conscious of death all the time. I think this is probably part of one's Catholic upbringing, I don't know. But I certainly feel that, I want everything in order. And I try, that's why I pay my bills immediately they come in and things like, it's extraordinary, really. That I know is extraordinary because my friends I've spoken to about here, they think I'm complete nutter on this. Yeah. I know, for instance, I'm flying off tomorrow on holiday, and I know exactly where my will is. My secretary knows exactly where the order of service for my funeral is. Everything, yes. Extraordinary.
Do you think there are lessons to be learned from the past?
Oh, yes, because, I mean, everything you do has an effect on your personality, your character, and your actions from now on. I'm quite sure of that. But I like to think about the past occasionally. I learn the lessons. At the end of each day, I do a sort of roll call, and I say, well, now, you know, how good, bad, or indifferent you were. And I keep a diary. And it's my own personal sort of log of how awful I've been. And then I admonish myself, and I say, no, you will not do that again. And, you know, you shouldn't have done that, you shouldn't have done that. Occasionally I say, that wasn't bad.
Do you read into that diary often?
Yes, occasionally I do, yes.
On a regular basis?
Probably about once every 3 months.
How regularly do you write into it?
Oh, every day.
At any particular time of the day?
Not necessarily. Usually it's about 6:30 in the morning the following day. You know, I sort of sleep on it. Sometimes if something extraordinary has happened, before I go to bed I would jot it down. But if it's extraordinary, I'll remember it anyway. And I find actually it's probably better, instead of being frightfully enthusiastic, as I am a bit black and white person, you know, I might go a bit over the top about describing something. I think probably it's better to sleep on it and then take a more rational approach and sort of cool light of day following morning.
Do you talk to yourself in the diary?
Yes.
What sort of things do you say?
Again, about, I shouldn't have done this, or you handled that badly. Or perhaps you were too short with so-and-so, and there would have been a better way of telling so-and-so off. And, you know, you must be conscious of doing that.
How far back do your diaries go?
Since 1960, in detail.
And what sort of things would you have had in them then?
Hopes and fears, really. Much change, it's changed quite dramatically. From always looking forward and always wanting to do something else. I don't do that any longer at all. I don't want to do anything, really. I mean, that sounds I'm negative and idle, but no. Because I just realise the futility of it. And I don't really worry about things to come. Because that's one thing I've certainly learnt from my diaries. All the worries I had were of ginormous proportions. And I know that everything that actually happened, the way it happened was nothing like the way I thought it was going to happen. So all that time and effort and energy was wasted in worrying about it. So that's been one of the big lessons in my life.
Is there any one thing that keeps recurring in the diary when you look back on them?
Yes, how I wish I could lose weight. Yes.
But you don't need to lose weight.
Oh, that's what everybody said. I wish I could be about 1.5 stone less than I am.
And does that always appear in the diary?
It's always been in my diary. Not every day, no. I think I'm getting a bit better about it now. Because I think since I've taken up a sort of very strict exercise regime over the last 18 months or so, that I realised that it doesn't really matter if I'm actually quite fit now, and I've sort of toned up a bit, and I'm really not as flabby as I thought I was. I still managed to get into size 10 and size 12 clothes, but I still think, you know, I actually see myself as about an 18-stone female. No, I'm just 9. Yeah, it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary.
You seem to be carrying on that tradition of strict disciplinarianism.
Oh, yes. Yes, very much so. Yes, it's probably more so now than it's ever been.
Did you ever imagine as a child that you would?
Never. Goodness knows. Somebody had told me that I was going to be a disciplinarian. I just said, you're mad. Because I was one I thought that would always buck against it. I did at school. I did try. But no, much more so now. And I think it's really because I have agreed to do certain jobs and take on certain responsibilities, and the very act of taking them on means that I've committed myself to a very, very strict self-discipline regime. I'm very, very disciplined about drinking now, and about eating, and everything. Literally everything.
Do you think that comes from the Catholic sense of guilt?
Oh yes, I think so. Very, very markedly, yes, very largely. Though not wholly, because I certainly know other people who have a similar type of an attitude. I'm probably not as strict as mine. I mean, most of my friends are really quite amazed by it. They laugh at me. They put my leg about it. It's good for me. I don't take myself seriously, actually. And I don't impose my disciplines on other people. I do in the workplace. I'm very much a stickler for excellence. And I get very cross if something is pointed out to somebody and the same mistake is made again. I really do get very cross indeed. I hate sloppiness of any sort in written reports or in work that's produced or in the way that things are presented. I really find that very, very difficult. And I'm pretty intolerant because I set very high standards for myself, and I set high standards for those around me. And they always have the option, if they don't want to match up to those standards, there are jobs elsewhere and they can go and do something else. And they know that. But I believe that that is the way that we do the best possible job. After all, if you have a senior job and you're paid a good salary, you've got to give absolutely of your best. I have no time at all for people in this country who are at the top of the tree and say, oh, well, if it went for the rotten taxation in this country, I would try much harder. I can honestly say with my hand on my heart that I can't work harder. I couldn't work harder than I'm working now. But I think I've been like that for years, and yet now I'm working a lot harder than I was. So again, you can program yourself, and I'm certainly finding my work much more effective than it was. It's a constant self-improvement thing right through.
Detta O'Cathain, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and a very daunting one.
Oh, goodness. I hope you don't mean daunting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.